Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to another Star Wars video. Today's will be short, but I think also interesting because we are talking about the real-world backstory of my favorite planet in Star Wars, Coruscant. Coruscant, of course, appears very prominently in the Star Wars prequel trilogy, but for even longer has been a major part of Star Wars continuity. Did you know, for example, that Coruscant first appeared in Star Wars in 1991 in Heir to the Empire? That's over 8 years before The Phantom Menace, and is one of the best examples of George Lucas pulling from the expanded universe when making Star Wars movies. But things are a little bit more complicated than that, so let's start at the very beginning. The idea of a metropolitan imperial capital, a city planet at the heart of the galaxy, has existed for some time, and in early script versions of Return of the Jedi, one of the major set pieces was a planet called Had Abaddon. Had Abaddon is very similar to Coruscant. As I mentioned, it was covered by a planet-spanning city. It was the seat of Palpatine and Imperial power, and in the movie, the ultimate confrontation between Vader, Palpatine, and Luke would have taken place in the bowels of the city planet. There are some differences though. Had Abaddon seems like it was even more polluted and kind of industrial than Coruscant, and if you've ever wondered why Endor is sometimes called the Sanctuary Moon, that's because original scripts for Return of the Jedi or Revenge of the Jedi actually had Endor in orbit around Had Abaddon. It would have been a nature reserve, a sanctuary, hence the name Sanctuary Moon. Kind of interesting what early aspects of Star Wars end up making their way into the official continuity. Anyway, while Had Abaddon obviously didn't make it into Episode 6, if you look at the Ralph McQuarrie concept pieces, many of them bear a striking similarity to what we'd see with Coruscant, especially Coruscant as it appeared in early Star Wars legends. We see skyscrapers covering a planet to the point where it's developed an artificial surface, tops of buildings looking like the base of the planet. Interestingly, this is an approach taken most directly in Episode 1, and in later movies, Coruscant was given a bit more height variety, but we also see the gigantic canyons of skyscrapers. We see the city covering the entire planet and how that's a spectacle from space. We see an early illustration of what would eventually become Monument Plaza, and we see something very similar to the old Legends Imperial Palace. So in canon, the Imperial Palace is basically where the Jedi Temple used to be. It's the same building, but in Legends, it was actually a distinct building, very similar to the original Ralph McQuarrie concept art. So although Had Abaddon did not make the movie, the idea of an ecumenopolis as a center for Imperial power actually did make its way into the earliest material for Star Wars Legends, and specifically the West End Games source books. I mean, the table of contents for the Imperial source book has a colored Ralph McQuarrie piece, and also specifically mentions the Galactic Core and Imperial City by name. Anyway, by the time Timothy Zahn was writing the Thrawn trilogy, he took from lots of these sources, the stuff in West End Games, the idea of Had Abaddon, and created a full, fleshed out version of an Imperial city, an Imperial capital, which he called Coruscant, but which, particularly in other sources, would also sometimes be called Imperial Center. The two names, by the way, have now come to mean the same thing. Coruscant is the planet, Imperial Center is what it was sometimes referred to during the height of the Empire and even afterwards. But what's interesting is that Dark Empire Issue 1, which also came out in 1991 and was sort of competing with the Thrawn trilogy to be the first step in establishing the new Star Wars continuity, also had its version of Coruscant, which went with the West End Games term of Imperial City. Another interesting fact is that if you listen to old Star Wars audiobooks that came out from around this time, you'll hear that Coruscant is not pronounced like Coruscant, but specifically with a second hard C, Coruscant, and this is one of many examples of something in Star Wars appearing first on page, people taking a crack at making a correct pronunciation, then later having the official pronunciation just be different. Another good example would be Palpatine, who used to be called Palpatine, or even Bespin, which was often called Bespin. Anyway, Coruscant would become a major part of pretty much every Bantam-era Star Wars Legends book, and was really very similar to what we'd get in the prequels and beyond, which makes sense because everything was basically being built off the original idea of Had Abaddon and an Ecumenopolis Imperial Center. However, Coruscant's first on-screen appearance was actually in the 1997 version of Star Wars Episode 6, the Gold Edition, which is actually the VHS copy that I had growing up as a kid. I think it's a decent mix between special edition changes that are at least tolerable or sometimes even good, like swapping out the Yub Nub song for Victory Celebration, but without some of the more ridiculous changes. Anyway, by 99, Coruscant was named and appeared in Episode 1, and the rest is history. I've gotta say, it must have been very exciting for Star Wars book fans to have seen Coruscant appear by name in a movie. Not only by name, but to take such a prominent role. And to be honest, I think this is pretty reflective of how George Lucas generally treated the Star Wars expanded universe. If there was a cool idea within, he would adapt it, particularly if it was based off an idea that he created. That being said, if Coruscant in the Thrawn trilogy was described as always being nighttime or had some special quality, there's no doubt that George would have just completely ignored that, but I think that's completely fine. Now, there is a bit more detail that we can go into regarding the very early history of Coruscant. There were ideas for a city-covered Imperial Center from early scripts for A New Hope, but I think keying in on Had Abaddon as the beginning of everything is really the most logical point. But guys, that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, this has been your host, EckhartsLadder. Be safe, have fun, and may the Force be with you.